The paper I'm presenting today embodies a number of interests of mine: critical approaches to trade and investment, ecology, Canada's role in the hemisphere, building resistance to a lot of this. And I'll start by saying that the people in Latin America face a lot of ecological challenges, but fragile democratic institutions and practices hamper taking action. And in this paper, I explore the links between environmental stewardship, democratic governance, and foreign regulatory interference from a public policy perspective. And I center on how extractive capital, in collusion with the Canadian state, contribute to environmental degradation and derail efforts to protect precious mountain water resources in central West Argentina, the Cuyo region, which is along the boundary with Chile. Canadian foreign policy is always in a constant flux, but recent transformations have been radical. Stephen Harper's Conservatives, since they took power in 2006, corporate capital, and in particular extractive capital, has not simply influenced economic and foreign policy, but has taken over. And transnational corporations are not only setting Canadian policy, they're also directly intervening to shape the regulatory context in their host countries abroad. The privatization of foreign policy is changing not only its objectives, but also who carries it forward. Canadians are often sold the image of an enlightened nation that promotes democratic governance, human rights, shared prosperity, environmental stewardship, yada, yada. Such foreign regulatory intervention, quote unquote, in the South achieves exactly the opposite of all that. The quote unquote nice Canadians have been pushed back, and instead some quite ugly characters are showing their faces. The activism of Canadian capital coincides with an unprecedented expansion of natural resource extraction. This is not only a priority for neoliberal regimes in the region, also left-leaning governments have embarked on, quote, new extractivism that is purportedly oriented to finance social expenditures. Particularly in the case of mining, post-neoliberal governments are pursuing market-friendly approaches and courting foreign investors with great zeal, as in Argentina. Advocates claim that extractive capital, much of it originating from Canadian-owned or based companies, contributes to inclusive forms of development. More convincingly, others, such as Henry, argue that this is a 21st century version of extractive imperialism that brings, in the best case, distorted development outcomes. Still, subordinate social forces can utilize democratic spaces to resist that imperialism by, for example, establishing laws and regulations that protect social and environmental rights. And in doing so, stop or delay projects or diminish the profitability of extractive capital. There are arenas of contestation where effective resistance to Canadian extractive capital cannot be ignored. The international relations of the new extractivism bring together dissonant partners: a Canadian conservative government and extractive companies with, quote, progressive governments in Latin America. Argentina, under Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, has seen enormous growth of Canadian mining. Both governments promote a vision of progress embodied in the extraction process while limiting environmental laws and other regulations that stand in the way. My case study refers to legislative efforts to protect remaining Andean glaciers from large-scale mining activity. Protecting these glaciers is important because of global warming and other severe threats to water security in mountainous regions, such as glacier melting, pollution of underground sources, diminishing flows in rivers, and desertification. For the Cuyo region, commonly referring to the provinces of Mendoza, San Juan, and La Rioja, these are matters of vital importance. Sizable investments in mining only took off in the 1990s in Argentina under the Carlos Menem government, when a new, extremely favorable regulatory framework was put in place with the help of the World Bank. Central to the new legal regime is a unique bilateral treaty between Argentina and Chile. This controversial agreement opens a massive tract of the Andean Mountains for joint exploration and mining. And the critics allege that it has created a third virtual country ruled by the extractive corporations. Large-scale mining can affect water security in various ways, such as directly drawing vast amounts of water, contaminating sources, and through glacier retreat. Less emphasized in the literature is that mining can affect water security indirectly as by regulatory intervention, shaping the regulatory regime that is crucial to attain water security. The two controversial mines here are Veladero in the Argentinian side and Pascualama straddling the border about 10 kilometers from the other, from Veladero, both owned by Barrick Gold. Veladero is in production since 2006. The approval process for Pascualama has been prolonged and convoluted, and one controversy refers to the adjacent glaciers. In fact, this week, Barrick announced that it is suspending for the time being the construction of Pascualama for reasons related to that I'm talking today. These mines were key catalysts for the Argentinian glacier law. This act, the Glacier Act, is intended to protect delicate glacial and periglacial areas as well as key freshwater sources from the pollution and destruction caused by natural resource extraction. The convoluted story of this act is one where environmental concerns have been sidetracked by corruption, powerful economic interest, foreign investors supported by rich country governments, as well as international treaties. And Canada's Barrick Gold plays a central character in the plot to derail it. The legislative process and its aftermath are complex. In a nutshell, the original law proposal was passed unanimously in October 2008 by both chambers of Congress in Argentina. Therefore, it was passed with rare support of both official and opposition parties. However, 3 weeks later, by decree from President Cristina Kirchner, the law received a total veto from the executive branch. The veto issued by Kirchner stated that the measure to ban mining and oil extraction in defined areas was, quote, excessive. The press referred to this rarely used measure as the Barrick veto, given the existing perceptions. How can one explain unanimous Congress support and then a sudden presidential veto? It appears that the parliamentary process evolved quickly and opposition forces did not coalesce to lobby Congress. Thus, the law reflected perceptions of deep environmental concern, but not the affected economic interest. According to the testimony to a Canadian parliamentary committee of the environment minister at the time, Romina Piccolotti, quote, Canadian companies operating in Argentina did not want the glacier protection law to limit their mining prospects and subsequently pressured the president into vetoing the law, end of quote. Piccolotti adds that these pressures were accompanied by threats, and here I continue the quote. If the president would not veto the law, Barrick would work to block other financial bills that were critical to stabilizing the Argentine economy during the global financial crisis. The president capitulated to Barrick's pressure and vetoed the bill, which has become known euphemistically as the Barrick veto, end of quote. Soon after the veto, Piccolotti was fired from her ministerial job. Although versions differ, the official version for dismissal cited irregularities in her ministry. However, the press reported that, quote, government officials admitted that the main reason for the expulsion of the environment secretary was her championing of this law, end of quote. These events ignited a public debate that was marked by allegations of the links between mining companies and government officials. The president had met before and after the veto with Barrick executives, She also met with Stephen Harper and Peter Monk, head of Barrick, when she came to the June 2010 G20 meetings in Toronto, and again with Stephen Harper in Seoul G20 a few months later. Legal accusations were launched, arguing that there was a secret agreement that gave special value-added and income tax benefits to Pascua-Lama, which were the condition for Barrick to proceed with the investment. Finally, a new version of the law, of the glacier law, was again passed by Congress, this time in a divided vote in September 2010, 2 years later. However, today, 3 years after its enactment, the achievements of the law, vetoed by the president but voted twice by call for Congress, remain weak. The press refers to this stall as the second silent veto. While mining companies legally block the enforcement of the law, the government does not meet deadlines for implementing the inventory of strategic water reserves in the mountains, which was required by the law. The law was also judicially stopped in the key province of San Juan, where Pascua-Lama is located. A federal court suspended its implementation, arguing it is an intrusion into provincial jurisdiction. Although ostensibly launched by miners' unions, the press claims that mining companies stand behind the suit. Barrick's Argentina subsidiary also directly sought and obtained two similar injunctions a few months later, explicitly stating that the Glacier Act would create, quote, a state of uneasiness and uncertainty, end of quote, regarding the prospects for Veladero and Pascua-Lama. It took 2 years until July 2012 for the Supreme Court to overrule the preliminary injunctions, but the law still remains in legal limbo, and the glacier inventory that is crucial to affect the law has not commenced in the so-called conflict provinces. So what's the relevance of all this in terms of the Canadian state? Is it possible that Canada is a bystander and Barrick Gold a bad corporate apple? Not representative of Canadian policy? The evident answer is yes. The Canadian government is fully behind. I don't have time to go through the full argument, which would include discussing the role of trade and investment treaties, the efforts to secure investor rights, setting in place corporate-friendly corporate social responsibility guidelines, lax regulatory regimes, legal impunity for crimes committed abroad, export credit agencies such as our EDC, and so on and so forth. I can tell you that a known academic in testimony before Parliament quoted a Latin American subsecretary of Energy and Mines saying, quote, as far as I can tell, the Canadian ambassador here is a representative for Canadian mining companies, end of quote. Clearly, the actions of Barrick Gold in Argentina cannot be seen in isolation from Canada's foreign and economic policy. Canadian citizens must regrettably share responsibility for the role of our government and our corporations have played in defeating the Glacier Act, for disrupting democratic processes in Argentina, and for another setback in our response to global warming. We can take hope from the courageous resistance of community organizations, environmental groups, social justice organizations, and progressive politicians in Argentina and Chile, which have for the moment stopped the Pascua-Lama project and the international solidarity behind them. Here in Canada, we need to take action to make sure that in the future Canada adopts a different posture, and that Canadians indeed become the nice guys that we purport to be. Thank you.